Good evening, everyone. It's great to see all of you again to our Krasno Global Event Series. Today, we are dealing with the most topical issue, which has been much in the news recently. Rising energy prices, climate change, and widespread anger about Russia's and Germany's agreement to build the Nord Stream 2 pipeline have caused much attention and controversy. It is therefore a pleasure to welcome you all to our online event on energy security today, Nord Stream 2, Turk Stream, Russia, and hybrid warfare, and actually many other topics which we will also talk about today. I'm Klaus Larres. I'm the Richard M. Krasno Distinguished Professor of History and International Affairs here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I've organized the Krasno Event Series since 2012 when I joined UNC, and we are still going strong. As you know, the Krasno Event Series always deals with issues of great global concern. Today, we have three most knowledgeable special guests. There's Dr. Daniel Nussbaum from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. We have Dr. David Dorondo from Western Carolina University near Asheville, and Margarita Assenova of the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. Each of our speakers will enlighten us with his or her take on the current state of energy security today by giving a brief talk of some 10 minutes. Then we will have a brief panel discussion, and then, as always, we open it up to questions from you, the audience. If you wish to ask a question, then please submit your questions in writing by making use of the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our Krasno assistants, Sam Timmons and Leila Beria, will select the questions and read them out aloud to everyone. There are usually so many interesting and provocative questions. Unfortunately, we cannot answer them all, but we will do our best, of course, to cover most of your questions. Please mention your name and your location when asking a question. And as always, we are videotaping our event today, and within a day or two, you will be able to view it on our famous YouTube channel. That is youtube.com/KrasnoUNC, and please watch them as often as you possibly can. We also have a mailing list. If you are not yet on my mailing list, then please send me an email or go to our website and fill in the form, and we will be happy to put you onto the mailing list. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to welcome you today to our Krasno event at UNC on energy security today, Nord Stream 2, Turk Stream, Russia, and hybrid warfare. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Daniel Nussbaum. At the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, Dr. Nussbaum is the chair of the Energy Academic Group, and he is a faculty member of the Operations Research Department. Among his many activities, not the least important is the provision of cost estimating and business case analysis for the departments of the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, and not least for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Daniel Nussbaum studied mathematics and economics, and he was educated at Columbia University and Michigan State University. Dan, it's a great pleasure to welcome you today. We are keen to listen to your talk, which is entitled Threats to Energy and Cybersecurity and Nord Stream 2, Impact on the NATO Alliance. Over to you, Dan.
Well, thank you very much to you for organizing all this. Thank you to everybody for attending. Happy Veterans Day. Or as we used to say, for those of us with gray hair, happy Armistice Day, right, if you recall that. Of course, the war didn't end except on the Western Front. It ended earlier on the Eastern Front, and it didn't end until much later on the Turkish Front, on the Ottoman Front. But we celebrate Armistice or Veterans Day anyway today. So happy holiday to you. So I want to start out with a few slides on who we are at the Naval Postgraduate School. Because the truth is, if I asked you to raise your hand if you knew who we are, typically 10% of the people know who we are and most don't. So can I get a screen share, please? Right, okay, so thank you. So just a quick thing, which is we are a fully accredited postgraduate technical university tucked inside the US Navy. I know you're asking, why don't we just send our people to Purdue and Georgia Tech and whatnot. There's a long reason for that, but we've been around for quite a while, roughly 100 years, and we moved to Monterey, California. And we really do run master's and PhD programs in technical subjects. No French, no social work. It's all mechanical engineering and electrical engineering and operations research and so on. The coolest part, of course, is the background. You can see that we are in incredibly beautiful Monterey, California. Perhaps you know Carmel, California, or Pebble Beach. We're right there, and you can see the background behind me. You can see the size of the school, which is really the introduction to who this larger school is. We are the nation's National Security Research Institute, if you will. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's the larger picture of who we are. The next picture really is who's this energy academic group. So you, of course, know classic disciplines of chemistry, physics, math, etc. But a cross-cutting institute would be an academic group. And I've run this energy academic group. We have three purposes you can see there. They are education, research, and outreach. Energy is really important for everybody, and it's really important for the military. If you read history, you realize that in World War II, Germany went down to the Balkans, to the Caucasus, because they needed the Baku stuff. The Russians met them at Kharkov, and that was sort of the end of the German drive. The Japanese had no fuel of their own, so they were dependent upon the fuel lines. And when we took apart their gasoline ships, their combat logistics fleet, it was the end of Japan, roughly. So we do education, we do research, and we do outreach. I think that's the most important thing. Can I have the next slide, please? So we do this through the professional development, and we teach short courses, and we have course topics. I wanted to give you some sense of the things that we teach. Never mind the sponsors, that's all gibberish. It's all inside DoD gibberish. And the locations are the continental United States and outside the continental US. I have a team right now in Vilnius. Why Vilnius in Lithuania? Because they have the NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence. Who knew, right? And we are a strategic partner of theirs. They have a responsibility to get education out to NATO states and NATO wannabes. That is Georgia, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and so on. And so we help them with precisely that. So we teach classes that you see: energy security strategic overview, energy security infrastructure, energy security infrastructure resilience. That is, what happens when the grid goes down? How do you protect it from going down? And so on. So we do a great deal of that. May I have the next slide, please? By the way, that's 3 slides. I'm on the 4th of 6, if you're keeping track. I want to tell you not just about the education we do, but some of the research we do. And the research comes in a couple of packets. One of them is optimization. You'd expect that from a person in the operations research department. The second large bullet is critical energy infrastructure protection and resilience. That's the transmission lines and the grids and so on. I do think that the new infrastructure bill that President Biden is about to sign has a short ton of money for fixing and enhancing the transmission system, something that's quite needed and which no one else was willing to pay for. We do renewables and emerging technologies, and we also do awareness and behavioral change, because people don't think of energy. It's always there. They assume when they need it, they ask the logistician for it, and voila, it appears. They don't realize how scarce it can really be and how fragile that whole system is. So we do a lot of research, most of which can be seen, the unclassified stuff, which can be seen on our website. So the next slide, please. We're going to get into Nord Stream, Turk Stream, and so on with other people's talks, but I want to emphasize you should think about things as networks and supply chains. When you think about networks, it makes them more complicated, but it also allows them to be analyzed in analytical ways. So whether it's just-in-time networks or what I suspect we're going to go to, which is just-in-case. Just-in-time is terrific, except when it doesn't work. And then you need a little bit of slack in your inventory. You know about computer chips. Energy is a really big network, flows around the world, and I have a picture for you on the next slide, but not yet. So energy is for sure a network. road networks are, of course, a network. And if you have to go from here to there and you realize there's construction in the way, in your mind, you have ways around it. Well, that's all sort of intuitive network analysis. Water supplies, banking supplies, all these things are networks. And to think of things in networks is a good way to set up analysis. And in particular, energy moves over networks that are parts of very complex supply chains. And while everybody said, yeah, complex supply chains, it has just dawned on us that they really are fragile. And when that fragility hits, bad things happen, right? So we're all living with that. So let me go to the next slide. And by the way, that is actually my last slide. I have two things on this slide. One of them is a bit dated, 2017. My co-panelists will fix this, by talking about modern things. But if you look at the politics of it all, if you look at how much of the flows of things depend upon Russian natural gas, the different colors give you the degree of dependence. And you can see that there are pretty high degrees of dependence. An interesting little black thing in the middle between Poland and Lithuania is, if you don't know, Kaliningrad, or East Prussia, as we used to say, Kaliningrad, and it, of course, has its own nuclear plant. Is that right? I think so. So you can see the various degrees of dependence that the countries of Europe have on Russian gas. To me, Russia acts just like any monopolist or wannabe monopolist. They want to grab up this pipeline and that supply thing, and they want to act like a monopolist. But really, for all the complications of Russia, Nussbaum's simple view is in the bottom left of this slide. Russia has three great equities. They want strategic depth. That is, they want to be able to fall back without having to give up everything. You see, they know how to spell Napoleon, and they know how to spell Hitler. We say, what do you need strategic depth for? Well, I just told you. They have an historic memory. They want to be able to fall back. During the Cold War, they had Poland and the other countries as strategic cushions. So how much strategic depth does Russia want? That's easy. Nothing will satisfy. They always want more. And so whatever they have now, they want more. Whatever they had then, they want more. But it's a really big equity of Russia with their historic memory to want strategic depth. It drives a lot of what they do. The second bullet is respect or a seat at the table. They do not want to be disrespected or thought of as a minor power. They always, well, so what? Everybody thinks that. But Russia thinks of it very all the time. And preferably, they'd like to have the gavel. They'd like to be at the head of the table running the show. That's an important motivation in my mind to what they do. And of course, the old story, they want a warm water port. I think those three things drive a lot of understanding about Russian motives and activities. So I think if you wrap that into the discussion that will follow on Nord Stream and Turk Stream and the shortage of energy right now in Europe, those will help. The second thing, and the last thing I want to say in the bottom right, is that the world is beset with dichotomies and conflicting equities. So one of them is climate change and decarbonization. Glasgow tells you everything you need to know. People really want to do that. But as Jason Borodoff writes recently, the world is growing in population and the world is growing in energy use. And it's going to continue on both of those tracks. So how are you going to reconcile the need to decarbonize with the need to have greater energy? And he says, well, the developing country can have its additional fossil fuels. The developed country has to put in more ante into the pot. That's what he's saying. I'm not so sure it'll happen. I have a slide that I often use that has a tagline, fossil fuels forever. If you look at everybody's projections, fossil fuels don't go away for a really, really long time. So I think with that introduction, and I think I've gone about 10 minutes, I want to turn this back to the moderator, but I encourage you to think about dichotomies, networks, and Russia's equities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan. This was most illuminating. You mentioned, among many other things, that Western Europe is particularly dangerously dependent on Russian gas. So what do we do about it?
What we do about it is say to Europe, don't make the same mistake again. Please build some more storage. Please have some more longer term stuff and figure out how to diversify your sources. It's exactly what Lithuania did when they realized that when they became independent. The EU said, you can't join us unless you get rid of that Chernobyl design nuclear plant. And they said, we don't want to depend only on Russian gas. They built an electrical connector to Sweden. They built LNG ports. You have to diversify your sources. This is just like your private portfolio. And you have to have storage and then long-term contracts.
So would you recommend that Europe should again go for nuclear power? Because
I would, but I understand how toxic a conversation that is. I remember the signs in Germany that said Atomkraft 9, right? There are people who don't like it, are very serious about it. I disagree with them, but I'm probably going to lose the argument.
Mm-hmm. But when you say storage facilities, fair enough, but the gas has to come from somewhere, from Russia. Even if you store it and have better storage facilities, in the end, you're still dependent on getting the gas from Russia.
You are, and it's a bit different from the example I'll give, which was the British coal strikes before Margaret Thatcher came in. The unions really paralyzed the country. Thatcher came in and said, I know they're going to do it again. Please build up the supplies. Of course, they were domestic supplies, to your point. And so when the next strike came, the government weathered it. I think having storage and the other side of the table knowing you have storage changes the dynamics in the towards the person who has the storage. Doesn't solve the whole problem. I agree with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dan. I think we will continue to discuss that further in our program today. But I'm happy to welcome our next speaker, that is David Dorondo. And I'm particularly grateful to David, as he was the one who took the initiative to put together this panel on energy security in the first place. Since 1987, Dr. David Dorondo has worked at Western Carolina University, teaching courses on modern European political and military history and international relations. He is a member of the US Strategic Command's Academic Alliance, and he has served as a subject matter expert for the US Joint Staff Deputy Director for Global Operations. David Dorondo has also written or translated 4 books on modern German military and political history. He has also written a great number of journal articles and other publications. David was educated at Armstrong State College, the University of South Carolina, and St. Anthony's College of Oxford University. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today, David, and we are all keen to listen to your presentation on the politics of energy security, the view from Berlin. Over to you, please.
You're on mute, David.
Yes, sorry about that. Klaus, thank you very much indeed for hosting our panel this evening and for your excellent technical support as well from your students. I'd also like to welcome everyone who's on the call, wherever you might happen to be. My observations this evening are extemporaneous. They don't lend themselves to slides. That said, the subject is nonetheless very important. For the first time in a political generation, the government of Germany, presumably as of the second week of December, will no longer be headed by outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel. The federal elections, which occurred in September of this year, resulted in a tripartite coalition, which is currently being negotiated. This is a so-called Ampelkoalition, a streetlight coalition, because of the colors of the 3 parties involved. Red for the Social Democratic Party, gold or yellow for the numerically smaller but nonetheless significant Free Democratic Party, and of course green for the Green Party, Bündnis 90. The preliminary negotiations among the 3 parties generated a as you would expect, a preliminary report not long after the elections, which indicated that the three parties were willing to enter into formal coalition negotiations. And it is those formal coalition negotiations which are currently underway. The three parties have designated 22 working groups meeting at various locations across Germany. They had planned to have, each of the working groups had planned to have a preliminary report ready by today, a 5-page report, which was to go to the party principals. It was not anticipated that these 22 working group reports would resolve all contentious issues, and indeed they appear not to have done. Nevertheless, these reports are being compiled, and it is still the presumed target of a coalition agreement coming into fruition on or about the 6th of December with the presumed Chancellor Olaf Scholz of the SPD being sworn in along with his cabinet in that week of December. Whether or not this will occur, of course, remains to be seen. As always, the devil lies in the details. In very recent days, the contents of not a few of these preliminary reports, working group reports, unsurprisingly have been leaked to the press. There appears to be behind the scenes some rather contentious discussions going on among the three parties about not only policy positions, but also which leaders of which parties will get which ministerial posts. Among the various contentious issues are, of course, first and foremost, climate targets. All three parties agree that decarbonization of the German economy is a goal which has to be met. The question then becomes not whether this goal will be met, but when and by what means. According to the documents which have been leaked to the press, there appear to be some differences primarily between the representatives of the Green Party on the one hand and the representatives of the Free Democratic Party on the other. Not over whether or not there should be decarbonization in a carbon neutral Germany, but rather the timeline and, equally importantly, the means by which one gets there. And then finally, how one pays for that. There have also been rather contentious discussions, evidently, in the working group dealing with foreign relations and security. Arguments evidently over whether or not Germany can and in fact should strive for an actual 2% of gross domestic product being spent on defense specifically, or whether or not a larger target of 3% should be spent on defense, international relations, and international cooperation. The contents of that particular document were just leaked to the Süddeutsche Zeitung yesterday. It also happens to be the case that Senator Chris Coons of the United States, a senator from Delaware, who is a very close political associate of President Biden, is in Berlin today, evidently to talk about that very issue, all matters related to defense and foreign affairs. A third contentious issue, of course, is the one that Dan Nussbaum has already referred to, and that is the issue of energy security specifically. The three parties are in principle agreed that natural gas should serve as what has been termed a bridging fuel as Germany shuts down all remaining coal-fired power plants and coal mining in Germany, but also as Germany shuts down the remaining nuclear plants, a decision which was made in the immediate aftermath of the Fukushima disaster, a decision made by the now outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel. Uh, while they agree, the three parties, on the necessity for the use of natural gas as a bridging fuel to help Germany complete the transition to a carbon neutral economy, the question then becomes not whether gas would be used, but where it might come from and how it might be delivered. The most contentious issue, which Klaus, Larres, and Dan Nussbaum have already alluded to, is of course the pipeline Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 is complete in terms of its physical construction. It is now undergoing a certification process, first by the German certification authority, for which there is a 4-month window of time. And then there is to be followed a European Union level certification of Nord Stream 2. Interestingly enough, in recent days, the former chancellor candidate of the Green Party, Annalena Baerbock, has come out rather publicly and rather dramatically saying that in her view, Nord Stream 2 is likely illegal under EU law. That I found to be very interesting given the very public way in which she criticized it. It is also worth noting insofar as relations with Russia are concerned, where the gas is coming from, that both the Free Democrats and the Green Party have been quite vociferous in their criticism of Russian human rights abuses, Russian hybrid attacks, particularly cyber attacks on German institutions dating back to 2015. And of course, they've been very critical of the Free Democrats and the Green Party on Russia's crackdown on political opposition at home, from Alexei Navalny on down. There is therefore within this remaining weeks of coalition negotiations among the three parties, plenty of material for contention, and it remains to be seen whether and when these contentious issues will be resolved. But the three basic sets of issues are energy security, foreign affairs and defense, and of course, relations with Russia. Klaus, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you very much. And I look forward to fielding questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, David. Dan Nussbaum has been quite critical of dependence on Russia regarding gas. And the American media, American politicians have been very critical about Germany and Russia's cooperation on Nord Stream 2. What is the view from Berlin? How does Berlin justify having that gas pipeline with Russia? And they, of course, don't regard it as a bad thing. They regard it as a good thing. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, indeed, they do regard it as a good thing. From the point of view of keeping the lights on and keeping homes warm and keeping gas-powered factories running. We should never forget the fact, of course, that Russian natural gas deliveries to Germany, they go back to the chancellorship of Helmut Kohl. You may recall, everybody on this call likely does recall, or perhaps a majority of us recall, that during the administration of President Reagan, there was a great deal of criticism of Berlin's decision to begin accepting natural gas deliveries from Russia. When Nord Stream 2 was agreed upon by then Chancellor Schröder in Germany, it struck me at the time that there was not much public criticism at that moment. Nevertheless, the criticism has indeed arisen since. Republicans in the US Congress, and not only Republicans, this is bipartisan opposition to Nord Stream 2, continues to sort of simmer. There have been recent indications in both the Senate and the House that perhaps there might yet be an attempt to force President Biden to reinstate sanctions. Whether that happens, of course, or not, I don't know. But the opposition remains. It was Chancellor Merkel's government's position that Nord Stream 2 was first and foremost a business undertaking, and that it was not first and foremost a matter of geopolitics. Dan Nussbaum has very clearly pointed out, however, and I think anybody who can read a map knows that natural gas pipelines are geostrategic instruments. Energy delivery systems of whatever sort, if they are international energy delivery systems, are geopolitical instruments, at least at a potential level. I often tell my students in my international relations classes that pipelines might, natural gas pipelines might be considered a contemporary equivalent of a railway building in the second half of the 19th century. Railway building being a strategic means of projecting influence. We should not be surprised, therefore, it seems to me, Klaus, that gas pipeline networks and natural gas deliveries have become a geopolitical bone of contention, not only among the European states, but in a transatlantic context as well.
Thank you. But may I ask you, what would you do if nuclear power has been phased out, solar power and similar isn't yet as effective as we probably would all wish? With oil, you make yourself dependent on a very unstable Middle East. And that's the only option left is gas and Russia. So what would you do if you were a part of a European government? Would you just dismiss it, or would you say, well, that is what we have to do?
I would certainly not be in a position to dismiss it, whether I was in a government in Germany or any other European country. I think Dan Nussbaum points out something which is very important, and that is energy diversification as a partial guarantor of energy security. I can clearly understand, and in fact, I sort of intellectually accept the argument that says, the argument being made in Berlin, both by the outgoing administration and by the incoming one, that natural gas is essential for this transitional period. The question then becomes not whether gas is essential, but where it comes from. I would defer to both of my fellow panelists as to whether or not Russian gas it should be the preferred option. It certainly is the case at the moment. The argument is made in Berlin at the moment, both by the outgoing administration and by the incoming one, that Russian natural gas is not only immediately available, but it's cost effective as well, and that the Russian government has always met its contractual requirements. This is the argument which is made, regardless of the ups and downs of relations between Russia and the West. Not being an expert on sort of natural gas markets and so on, that's been the historic argument which has been made since the chancellorship of Chancellor Kohl, and it's still being made today. And I would certainly defer, particularly to Margarita in this respect, as regards availability of gas from other sources.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated. It's actually quite interesting that the current American Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, he wrote his PhD thesis about pipeline politics in the 1970s and 1980s. So he should really know all about pipeline politics and diplomacy. And perhaps that expertise he will actually need today. Let me come to our final speaker today. That is Margarita Assenova. Margarita is a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. She's a regular contributor to the Jamestown Foundation's flagship publication, Eurasia Daily Monitor, and has also written extensively on Russian disinformation for the Voice of America. Since 2006, Margarita has served at the Foreign Service Institute of the U.S. Department of State. She's course chair for South Central Europe, Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and for the Central Asia Advanced Area Studies program. Margarita Assenova is an award-winning professional journalist with over 30 years of experience. For many years, she worked as a reporter and editor in Bulgaria, and she has also reported extensively on nationalism in the Balkans. And the Balkans, of course, is yet another area which has come to much recent attention because of another looming crisis there. Margarita has also designed and implemented US projects on security, energy, economic development, and democracy building in Eastern Europe and Central Asia for a number of prominent US think tanks. Margarita, it's a great pleasure to have you here today. And today you will talk about Nord Stream and Turk Stream implications for regional gas market development. And I think we would all like to hear the difference about Nord Stream and Turk Stream and in what way they do differ and how important they actually are. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I will start with something else, though, on tail of David Dorondo's presentation. When we're talking about climate goals, climate targets, and we're talking about Russia as a source of primary source of gas for Europe, we tend to forget that Russian gas is the dirtiest gas that exists out there. The production of Russian gas releases a lot of methane gas in the atmosphere. The pipelines in Russia are pretty leaky. So Russia is the biggest polluter in terms of methane gas of the atmosphere. And one thing that it's not stressed enough is methane gas is 80 times more dangerous to the atmosphere and has impact on climate change than carbon emissions. It just dissolves in a way that the effect is 80 times higher. So the more dependent we are on Russian gas, the less we're likely to reach our targets on climate change, on climate reduction of temperatures of the planet. And nobody seems to be doing anything to demand that Russia catches this methane gas and puts it back in the pipes so that it doesn't pollute the atmosphere. When we are urging Russia to produce more gas to alleviate the energy crisis in Europe, I mean the American administration and the President of the United States himself, we're actually undermining our own goals. And until this is solved, and maybe that's why Russia wasn't present in Glasgow, and China wasn't present in Glasgow either. The presidents of China and Russia skipped this big forum. Until this issue is channeled, the more dependent on Russian gas we are, the more we are undermining the planet, increasing the speed of climate change, and whatever we do in Europe and the United States is not going to be enough to turn things around. But let me start with what are the similarities between Nord Stream and Turk Stream? And I will start with one slide, sharing one slide here, and then I'll return to the crisis in Europe, which is here we see the Russian pipelines that are coming from Russia to Europe. I am going to increase the screen now. We see two very big pipelines. One is Yamal Europe that is parallel to Northern Lights and supplies the entire Northern Europe with Russian gas. And the other one is Brotherhood, also connected to the Central Asia pipelines through Central Asian Soyuz, and supplying the entire Central and Southern Europe. The pipelines through Ukraine were turning down south to Romania, through Moldova, Romania, Bulgaria, all the way to Turkey and Greece, supplying that part of the world. That pipeline at the moment is no longer used in the direction from Ukraine down to Turkey. There is another pipeline that was just built. You can see it on the map in the Black Sea as Turk Stream. It is completed at this point, and it was put in operation just this fall when the last compression station was completed. And that pipeline diverts the entire volumes of gas that were coming from Ukraine to Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. They're now coming in the reverse direction. And I'll show you a map in a moment that shows how exactly this is happening. So the point is, this is a diversionary pipeline. It's not bringing any new gas to Europe. It is bringing the 16 BCM of gas that was delivering before from Ukraine down south. Now it's coming from Turkey up north. It is the same quantity, the same volumes, absolutely no difference. When you look at Nord Stream 2, it is also a diversionary pipeline that is going to divert the remaining gas that is now coming from Ukraine to the northern direction through the Baltic Sea to Germany. And from Germany, that gas is going to go south through two pipelines. One is called Opal, and the other one is a parallel one called Yugao. And that pipeline, these pipelines are going to supply Central and Eastern Europe from the opposite direction, from Germany to the Czech Republic, from there to Slovakia. Therefore, the current pipelines that are used for delivering Russian gas from east to west are going to be used entirely from west to east to supply the entire region. What that means, though, is that, a couple of numbers about Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream. They do not bring any new gas volumes to Europe. They only reroute gas that is currently being transmitted by Ukraine. For example, in 2018, there was 86.8 BCM of gas transited through Ukraine. The capacity of Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream together combined is 86.5. So that means the entire gas that it was going through Ukraine is going to go through Nord Stream and Turk Stream. You can see the dependence, how much the countries in Eastern Europe and Central Europe depend on Russian gas. The further away they are from Russia, the less they depend on gas. France and Italy, they have different sources. They have very diversified gas supply networks. They have a lot of LNG terminals. They do not depend on Russian gas at all. Germany depends about 80%. Germany imports about 100 BCM of gas. About 55 is coming from Russia. So it's about 55% dependent on Russian gas at the moment. And the closer you come to Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, Lithuania, you can see Bulgaria, Serbia, Macedonia, they depend more on Russian gas, or 80% and more. And these countries are in the most peculiar position, because once the pipelines are changed from east to west to be used from west to east direction, these countries are going to remain between these two big pipelines from the south and from the north. And that's going to prevent them from developing their regional gas markets. It's going to squeeze the pipelines, because the pipeline's capacity is not as big from west to east as it is from east to west. I always give this analogy of arteries and veins. If the arteries are coming from Russia to Europe, the veins are coming in the other direction. All these interconnectors, all these smaller pipelines that serve for exchange and swap of gas quantities and little trade and emergency situations, these pipelines cannot serve as a major delivery vehicle, as the main delivery vehicle for Poland, from Czech Republic, and from other countries in the region. So that means that they're going to be clogged. They're going to be bottlenecks on those pipelines. And that's going to prevent the region from developing other sources, routes for other sources of energy. Poland is building the Baltic pipeline from Norway through the Baltic Sea, because it does not want to be as dependent on Russia as it is now. Poland is still dependent about 80% on gas imports from Russia. They have built a LNG terminal that is going to be expanded now, and the capacity is going to go it's almost going to double, maybe about 40% more, so that it can deliver more gas to the country, probably 1/3 of the country's consumption. The country's imports are going to come from LNG sources. Lithuania built a terminal that made a difference in terms of security of gas supply. It also amounts to whether these countries have access to other sources of gas or not. And as I mentioned, Lithuania and Poland having gas terminals, LNG terminals, there is only one other country in the region that has an LNG terminal, and that's Croatia. a small floating terminal at the island of Kirk that is delivering 1.2 BCM annually of gas. Not enough to compare and to compete with Russian sources, but enough to supply Croatia and make it less dependent on Russia. The rest of the countries, particularly Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Czech Republic has more options and delivers gas from other sources as well. But the middle of Europe, Central Europe, and Southern Europe is going to continue depending on Russia. When I say Southern Europe, I mean the Balkans, Bulgaria. Romania has its own sources of gas, less dependent on Russia. But Moldova is completely dependent on Russia. And we saw what happened just 2 weeks ago when Moldova was pressed very hard by Gazprom and eventually signed a contract that is detrimental, that is not good for Moldova at all. And it was a way to undermine the new Western government of Moldova. Other options, there are other options in the region and they just came online. And one of them is the southern gas corridor coming from Azerbaijan through Turkey and then from through Greece and Albania all the way to Italy. This is one other source that came online recently, a strategic project of the European Union, which is very, very important. Not as much gas as one would want to see, but nevertheless, 16 BCM goes to Turkey, about 10 BCM goes to Europe. But even that said, Bulgaria is still not receiving the 1 BCM of gas that it's supposed to get from the Southern Gas Corridor because it has not built the interconnector yet. And this is going to be a problem for the future because Russia is going to continue exercising undue influence on the entire region, being completely energy dependent. Does Germany need Nord Stream 2? Germany imports 70 BCM of gas through Yamal, Europe, and Nord Stream 2. Germany also imports other gas from the Netherlands and Norway. It may need more gas in the future when the nuclear plants are closed down. But the current bookings of the Ugal pipeline, the pipeline that's going to connect Nord Stream 2 with the rest of Europe, through Germany with the rest of Europe, is only for 10 BCM. Only 10 BCM is going to stay in Germany. The rest is going to go to Eastern Europe via the Czech Republic, which means that at least in the first few years, Germany is not planning to increase as much consumption of gas as it may in the future. But the biggest problem of Germany is regardless the fact that it has supplies from the Netherlands and Norway, this production is being decreased in recent years, in the Netherlands by 28% last year, in Norway as well. Germany has not built any LNG terminal. And we're not talking about American gas here. We're talking about gas from anywhere Germany can get it. But having a reserve option, having another option is really important to have. I want to just very quickly look into the energy crisis. I will stop sharing now. That happened now in Europe just in the last few months. It seems to have eased this week after Gazprom started delivering gas through Yamal. Today we have levels of 300 million, almost 300 million cubic meters through that pipeline a day, which is good. But it was zero for several days last week and the week before. And at some point was even used on the reverse to deliver gas from Germany to Poland. At the same time, quantities through Ukraine were reduced by at least 50%. They have increased now in the last 3-4 days. And that behavior of Russia continued through the entire summer. It started in July and escalated with Russia not delivering any kind of extra gas supplies to Europe to fill the gas storages. The gas storages that Gazprom controlled was staying at the levels of 13-15% capacity. For the entire summer and fall, the gas started coming to those storage facilities just now. 4 days ago, it started coming a little bit. That's not going to be enough for the summer, for the winter. The winter has already started. People are using already heating in Europe. The third week of November is expected to be very cold. So we will see what is going to happen and whether Russia's claim that they are delivering on contracts, and yes, they are delivering on contracts, but they are not delivering on market obligations, because energy is not like any other goods. It's a strategic resource, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of storage and supplies. Europe has enough storage. Most of the countries in Europe have enough storage, but the storage was not filled to capacity. And that was the problem in Germany, in Austria, and in several other countries as well. Eastern Europe has very small storage facilities, and they need to work very hard to increase them. But even the countries with the biggest storage facilities suffered if they depended on Gazprom or Gazprom controlled certain storage facilities on their territories. It was a Russia-made crisis in Europe, regardless of the fact that the energy shortages are global and the Asian market is attracting all the LNG supplies. But had Russia delivered gas as every other year during the summer to fill up storages, and the winter to fulfill contracts, this would not have happened. We have prices in Europe that went from $6 or $5 last year, or even less than that, per million British thermal units, to all the way to 32. And this was a really, really big increase of prices. Countries could not buy gas at that price. The demand decreased as a result. The price went down because the demand decreased, because traders stopped buying. But that doesn't mean that the winter is going to be without trouble. And we don't know whether Russia is going to continue delivering gas to Europe, whether it's going to be pumping as much as needed to fill up storages, even though it's late, and deliver on contracts at the same time. We're not sure whether this is going to happen. So in the next four months, we're going to have a very unstable energy picture in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This was most interesting, but also quite scary, what you told us. So what is the solution? What would you do if you were the advisor to the new German government? What would you advise them to do?
Germany is in a very difficult position. For years, they've relied on this project of building Nord Stream 2, and they did not develop any other option. They will need time to develop renewable energy sources from biomass, for example, or any other potential source. That takes time. They are right when they say we're against any nuclear power plants being built now, because it takes a long time to build them. So that's not going to make much sense. We have energy climate goals that are targets that are more urgent. But Germany is in a very peculiar situation. And if they do not prolong the life of their reactors, they're going to be left for several years at least, dependent on Russian gas. The one thing that Germany needs to do, though, is to put some conditions to Russian producers and to Gazprom to make sure that methane emissions are reduced, they're captured, they are put. Apparently it's very easy to do that. It's just like plumbing. That's what engineers are saying. It doesn't take much effort to do that. It's an easy thing to do. So I think that at least Germany can do that, being so much dependent on Russian gas, and start thinking seriously, even if we're talking about gas, to build at least one regasification terminal so that it can have LNG deliveries if needed and when needed.
Thank you. You also mentioned that Nord Stream more or less had the same capacity as the, let's say, the old pipeline via Ukraine. But cannot both pipelines be used? The so-called old pipeline is not like not usable anymore. Both pipelines could be used. Why is that not done? That would double the capacity.
The old pipeline, you mean the Ukrainian network?
Yes, yes.
Well, that's the entire purpose of building Nord Stream and Turk Stream as diversionary pipelines, to bypass Ukraine, to squeeze.
I fully realize that, but if there is a lack of gas, for example, coming to Germany or to other European countries, couldn't they make use of both pipelines?
Yes, Gazprom has contract with Ukraine until 2024 to transit at least 40 BCM of gas through Ukrainian network. But this is a huge transmission network which has a capacity of 148 billion cubic meters with 14 compression stations with 8 storage facilities. This is a really huge potential for Europe that is not going to be used for political reasons. If Russia has a chance not to use it, it's not going to use it. The only option to continue using Ukraine as a transit route is if the European Commission implements fully the European laws and regulations regarding Nord Stream 2. Already the German court declined to grant exemption of Nord Stream 2 from the third energy package. There are other lawsuits that Gazprom filed, of course. They're going to continue. It's going to be years before this is decided. But there was a decision on the Opal pipeline that Gazprom cannot use it at full capacity. It has to be reserve capacity for third supplier. So if they cannot use Opal at full capacity, Opal is 36 BCM, that decision could transfer to Yugal. This is the parallel pipeline to Opal that is connecting Nord Stream 2, but it's a larger one, it's 55 BCM. So you have automatically reduced transit of gas instead of 110 BCM as the two pipelines, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 together make. They will have to transit a lot less. Only one pipeline of 20 BCM called NEL is not restricted, has not been objected by any country. But Poland objected to Opal usage, and it's going to object to Yugal usage as well. And because the energy solidarity is part of the European Constitution, of the Treaty of the European Union, this could not be disregarded by the court. And the court decided that Poland has a point. There has to be energy solidarity between European Union members. So that restricts the options to Nord Stream 2. But if these options are restricted and less gas is coming to Europe from Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, then Ukrainian network will have to be used for 45 to 50 BCM of gas. That's going to prevent Russia from using Ukraine as a country that they can squeeze, and they can also endanger its security, because the leverage Ukraine has now against Russia is that they are needed by Russia as a transit network. If they're not needed by Russia as a transit country, they could be attacked by Russia and then completely overrun by Russian troops.
Thank you. That's the way you put it is that gas doesn't seem to be the future as a source for European energy. So what is? If we cannot rely on gas, and if it's all very unreliable and precarious, so what do we do?
I agree with David Dorondo here, with Professor Dorondo, when he said it's not, gas is a good transitional fuel. It's a good transitional source of energy. Question is where it comes from.
And where do we go? Transition to where?
Transition to more renewable energy that is going to, well, look, let's look at one example in Europe. Let's look at South Wales. which was a coal country for many years. And they had to make changes, and they did make those changes. And now Wales is exporting electricity to the rest of Britain, and is producing about 60% of its energy that it produces from renewable energy sources. And they're planning to make it 70% very soon. I'm giving one example, not because it's just to show it's possible, but a small coal country that was in a coal region like West Virginia and the United States that managed to make that transition in such a convincing way. It is possible, but it takes really effort and consistency and good policies to do that. And good mathematics, how much energy you need and where you're going to get it for how long. If the mathematics are not there, there is nothing that can change. Germany started importing American coal when they started closing down their nuclear reactors. Is that better than nuclear energy? No, of course not.
Thank you very much. These are daunting problems.
I wonder if I can make two quick comments.
Yeah, please come on.
So first of all, I think the German government's smart. They understand the problem with Russia, and they're betting that they can get through this transition. Transition to what? There's a lot of stuff out there that holds promise. Hydrogen is one of them, and Germany is pushing heavily on hydrogen. But there's also all the battery stuff and all the fusion stuff and all the things that haven't happened. So I think Germany thinks it can hold its breath, live with Nord Stream for, I'm going to make up a number, 20 years, and then get over to the other side. That's the first thing. The second thing, to your point, Klaus, about all this excess capacity of supply, I agree with you. If there were friendly forces around the table, there aren't. If there were friendly forces around the table, we'd sort of be delighted with this extra capacity to use in case one breaks or we need more supply or whatever. But that's not the case. And in fact, there's no demand for the total supply that's capable, right? We don't really need it. This is all about, in my mind, this is all about a pincer movement against Ukraine. Margarita had a slide. It had two big red arrows, one to the north and one to the south, surrounding Ukraine. And if you didn't know what Zoom meeting you were in, you would have thought you were in a war planning exercise where we're going to go after the enemy via a pincer movement. This happens to be a pincer movement of energy around Ukraine. It's a classic military maneuver. And so it's not friendly forces around the table, and there are geopolitics going on. And I think the Germans have said, we can outlast this for 10 or 20 years and get to the other side.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the pincer
And
movement,
yes.
yeah.
And if you don't know what meeting you're in, you think you're in a war planning meeting.
Yes.
I want my third army going north and my first army going south, etc.
And Secretary of State Blinken today said that if Russia weaponizes gas, the United States is going to impose sanctions. But of course, the American government is worried now that there is another troop movement along the Ukrainian borders, and that's why they are making this statement. But didn't Kremlin use gas as a weapon during the summer and fall, literally putting Europe on its knees? And I think there were several goals with this movement. One is to put a lot of pressure on Europe to certify Nord Stream 2, which is not certified yet, it's not operational yet, and may or may not be certified to function, or may not function at full capacity. Two, to return back to the long-term contracts with Gazprom for much larger volumes of gas for long-term periods, at least 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, with very strict, rigid conditions of take or pay, or you cannot sell to another country, and whether you use it or not, you cannot resell that gas, which they got in trouble with the European Commission. But by putting Europe on its knees during this energy crisis, this is exactly what they're pursuing. Also, it is a way to show how powerful they are, and in a way change the make the European Union change its regulations on energy, and then exempt Nord Stream 2, exempt Opal, exempt Yugal, get these these pipelines functioning on Russian terms, not German terms. And when you're talking about the penetration of Russia in Germany, we're talking about dirty gas in terms of really the dirty way of production of Russian gas. But there is another dirty thing going with this gas, which is penetration of economies, strategic corruption, and political influence. And you look at the structure of the pipelines and storages and internal domestic suppliers of gas in Germany, they're all 50% belonging to Gazprom. The Opal, the Naval pipeline, these are all entities for transit of gas. The Ugal pipeline, they're all under one holding called WIGA. And WIGA is a holding between Gazprom and Wintershall. That's why it's called WIGA. And it has two Russians heading this consortium, this holding. Two Russians, there is no German. And then in each of these separate companies, you have one Russian and one German co-managers. There is the control of the gas storages. Again, you have Russian and German managers. This is incredible penetration of a strategic energy sector of a very important European Union and NATO member.
Thank you very much. We have plenty of questions to ask you. Before we do so, just one quick question to all our panelists. Are you worried about cybersecurity issues when you look at that pipeline network all over Europe? Is that a serious concern apart from the energy problem we have just talked about? David, how would you say?
I would say absolutely. While I'm not an engineer, there is a clear history dating to at least 2015 of Russian cyber attacks on German institutions. Cyber attacks of a major sort. Many of the persons on this call will well remember the attack on the German Bundestag in 2015, which shut down the entire internal network of the Bundestag. Not to mention, of course, the disinformation campaigns in the most recent federal elections when Annalena Baerbock was specifically targeted. There is clearly a cyber threat that is posed by Russia to Germany and other European countries. And it is clearly the case that electronic control systems on pipelines, as well as control systems for other sorts of physical infrastructure, can be targeted. I'll leave the details of the answer, of course, to both Dan and Margarita. They're more well-versed in it than I am. But from the point of view of the political perspective of the incoming German government, I think it is ill-advised for a prospective Chancellor Scholz already to be talking about a new Ostpolitik with Russia. He's mentioned in recent statements that perhaps such a new Ostpolitik is necessary.
That means a new policy of engagement with Russia.
Yes. And my question would be, well, in the 1970s, the Ostpolitik had a very practical purpose to ameliorate not only the conditions for persons living in what was then the GDR and behind the Iron Curtain, but also to regularize relations between the Federal Republic of Germany and the Soviet Union. Yeah. My question to a prospective Chancellor Scholz would be, well, what's the object of a new Ostpolitik now?
Okay.
What does one hope to gain from it?
Thank you. Daniel, would you like to come in on the cybersecurity question?
This is all part of what we now call gray zone warfare or hybrid warfare. The Russians attacking the Ukrainian electrical grid, the disinformation, the movement of troops, all of this is hybrid warfare. It's sort of below the threshold of warfare. We care about it. We're not helpless. We say, why don't we just cyber attack Nord Stream 2 and show the Russians? Well, you wouldn't do it in winter because you'd be shooting yourself. You could do it in the summertime, right? It's not as if we are powerless. We have hybrid capacities also. So this is like in the Cold War, the mutually assured destruction. Each side has a gun pointed at the other, and there's a sort of equilibrium that's established. I would say that going back to what I said about three things Russia wants, they want strategic depth, they want respect, and they want a warm water port. Nord Stream 2 does two of the three. They're isolating Ukraine, which gives them greater strategic depth because they then have a greater say in how Ukraine runs its foreign affairs. So check mark on the strategic depth. And they are an important voice in European energy and political and economic behavior because of Nord Stream 2. Check, check. That's 2 out of 3. That's not bad chess.
Thank you. Margarita, would you like to come in on the cybersecurity question?
I agree with Dan. We're not helpless, but they have managed to, Russian hackers allegedly have managed to disrupt the American pipeline here. So this is not very difficult thing to do when you have entities that are presumably not associated with the government, maybe criminal groups, but when you see what their targets, these are all targets that serve some geopolitical interests of Moscow. So it's very clear where the orders are coming from. They started with smaller ransomware attacks in the United States, like a hospital or a city, the city system down in Florida, and then they went bigger. They showed that they can do more damage in the United States. They show that they can do this in Ukraine, and Georgia has been subject to cyber attacks. So when you see which countries are subjected to cyber attacks and at which point of their political development, it's telling you very clearly where it's coming from. And I think that they have to be exposure of all the details of such cyber attacks, where they're coming from, and they have to be public exposure of this. It's very important that we know exactly where it's coming from, how is it connected, and there are so many wonderful forensic labs here in the United States that can do that, and they can publish this information, made it clear to the world, and made it clear to the Russians themselves what their government is doing.
Thank you very
much. The same is valid for China, not only for Russia, of course, but we're talking about energy today.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we have to turn to the questions. There are plenty of them. And Leila, why don't you ask the first interesting question, no doubt.
All righty. This is directed to all the panelists, and it comes from Dmitry Mitin. To what extent does Russia's dependence on Western Europe as the main destination for its energy exports moderates its behavior?
David, let's start.
Yes, yeah. The outgoing German government has repeatedly made the case that however much Germany and Europe might need Russian natural gas, whether from Nord Stream 2 or Turk Stream or whichever pipeline, it's also the case that Russia needs Western consumers. I asked the question directly to my fellow panelists the other day in a different context: who needs Nord Stream 2 more, Russia or Germany and the European Union? This has clearly been an argument which the German government has made, that Russia cannot afford to be a bad supplier because Russia needs the export market in Europe as much as Europe needs the gas. Now, I would add that Russia also wants to export natural gas to China, for example. Europe is not the only market for Russian natural gas. And I would leave the details of that, of course, to Dan and Margarita. But this is precisely the argument which the German government made in countering US pressure.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan.
Exactly right. I don't need to repeat it. There's an old joke on panels that everything has been said on a subject, but not everybody has said it. So I'm going to say a little bit more of what David said. Russia has built a pipeline to China, and they're going to build another one. So they really are looking for outlets to that other really big market. Historically, natural gas has been a localized product because you had to move it by pipeline. The advent of LNG, liquefied natural gas, is turning it into a globalized product, which means that the differences in price in different markets should smooth out over time, but it'll take over time. Russia right now has is, as David said, dependent upon Europe, but they're also reaching out to China. And we'll see what happens when everybody goes to LNG and Qatar, US, Algeria, maybe Iran get into that market.
And what's the difference of delivery between liquefied gas and more normal gas, ordinary gas?
Well, there's additional engineering that has to take place. You have to pressurize it at the front end and degasify it and regasify it at the other end. It was a big capital expense. But in my mind, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, once you've regasified it and stuck it into the pipe, it looks like natural gas.
Okay, thank you. Margarita, do you want to come in?
Well, the other day, Russia sent its first LNG shipment to India using the Arctic route. And this is due to the climate change, of course. The Arctic is getting warmer and ships can navigate there and from that direction to reach Asia. Russia is planning to take advantage of the global warming in that way, through the Arctic way, but at the same time is very afraid that the global warming is going to destroy infrastructure in Siberia, which relies on permanent cold, frozen land where that infrastructure is built upon. Once it starts melting, it can lead to collapsing of many construction sites there, many sites that were already constructed. So Russia is exporting some gas, about 30% of its gas, to other places and 70% to Europe. Europe is the most important market for Russia, but Russia has been always making the point there are other options, and they have other options, and they continue developing them. Novatek is building another LNG terminal. They are trying to reach as many places as possible. At some point, Russian LNG ship reached the United States in Boston. It wasn't a Russian ship, it was a Russian LNG that went through different traders, eventually ended up in the United States, and nobody knew until the last moment that it was coming from Russia. So LNG is so flexible, it can go anywhere, and Russia is not waiting on our solutions. Russia is preparing to ship LNG wherever it's needed. It's pretty big enterprise out there in Yamal and near St. Petersburg. There are about three in Sakhalin. There are about three big LNG facilities, and they're being doubled. There are others in the same area, Yamal 1, Yamal 2, and so on.
Thank you.
No, it's not that Europe needs to be afraid that Russian gas is going to stop coming to Europe, but the fact that Russia could send gas to Asia and not to Europe this summer and this fall showed a result that wasn't desirable for the European continent.
Thank you. Sam, do you want to ask the next question?
Yes. This question is for all the panelists. Can any of you comment on the strategic implications, reasons for, and the possible foreign complicity in the recent cancellation of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, which was, of course, an American project?
And who asked that question? Can you see that?
Yes, Colonel Wilkerson.
Oh, yes. Colonel Wilkerson was one of our former Krasno speakers, and Colonel Wilkerson was, of course, is well known for being the former chief of staff to Colin Powell, and hopefully he will be coming back as one of our speakers in the future. But David, would you like to answer the question?
I'm afraid I am not competent to answer that question.
Okay, let's pass on to Daniel. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Look, the current administration in Washington is anti-fossil fuel. That's probably overstated, but I'll leave it at that. It's anti-fossil fuel. They're not going to provide additional advantages to fossil fuel, whether through pipelines or whatever. And so they canceled it. Now they're simultaneously asking Saudi to pump more oil, and they're thinking about opening the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is a bit awkward. But the general thrust is in opposition to fossil fuels and in favor of renewables, wrapped up in the climate change discussion. I heard Ambassador Bob Sakuda, used to be US ambassador to Azerbaijan, on a Baku conference earlier this week, in which he told a story. He says, I have a house in Maine. The state of Massachusetts needs electricity. They're building a transmission line from Quebec to Massachusetts to get very clean hydropower from Quebec to Massachusetts. The transmission lines are 80% finished and they run through Maine. Maine had a vote, a referendum, and they said, no, thank you. Right? They don't want it in their backyard, right? So clean energy, yeah, but I don't want the transmission lines to go through my backyard. It's a complicated subject. There's lots of ideologues on all sides. And this pipeline, which I think would have done good things for energy security, do bad things from the climate perspective. And that's part of the dichotomy in the world, decarbonization versus you need energy. I think the answer to this is we compromise and we muddle through. There's not a clear answer, ideologues notwithstanding. We compromise and we muddle through so everybody can be annoyed.
Thank you. Margarita, do you have anything else to say about it?
No, that's true. It was, it's a climate targets. That's the clean energy agenda. It was behind it. And also there were also protests along the construction site in Indian lands that contributed to that issue that wasn't resolved during the previous administration and made it even more complicated later. So canceling the pipeline canceled all the problems with the local populations, the people who live in the Indian lands there.
Thanks very much. Let's go and have another question later.
All righty. Brian Kalef asks to all the panelists, did Russia manipulate or engineer gas prices, getting them to the current level, or are they a result of the open world market?
Who would like to tackle that question?
So I'm going to answer, and then Margarita will say the real answer, right? Of course they had a hand in it. Of course they benefited from it, but Europe caused some of this on its own, whether, as I said before, from storage, I know there's a second part of that, from diversified sourcing. Europe did some of this to itself, but Russia was glad to have it, and it reminded the world that Russia is there and they have a say, and it ticks box number 2 of give us respect and give us a place at the table. So yes, but it's not the whole story, is the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Market prices and market behavior, these two concepts do go together. You cannot have unreliable energy supplier on the market and then who manipulates the market, manipulates the prices as a result, and eventually we're talking about market prices determining the free market determining the prices. No, it was behavior by Russia, conscious decision, deliberate decision not to fill up Gazprom-controlled storages in Europe. The market reacted just like the stock market would react in the light of an unexpected event. Nobody expected that Russia would do that because that has not been pattern of behavior before. There is always summertime, filling up storages, and every supplier of gas knows that. In the summer, they buy. In the winter, they sell. Russia suddenly withdrawing from the market almost completely, just delivering on what it was needed in the summer months on contracts, was not enough to fill up storages. This is not market behavior. It's not a responsible market behavior. At the end of the day, we have so many regulations on the marketplace, but we don't seem to have enough regulations on manipulating market on the energy sphere, because we have a lot of monopolists there. The producers of energy are, each of them holds a kind of monopoly. It might not be monopolizing the world, but it's monopolizing certain regions. And when you have one producer delivering almost 50% of the imported energy to the European Union, to European continent, you need to have a responsible market player. Otherwise, there should be consequences, and there were none. Not a single consequence was implemented against Russia.
Thank you.
For that behavior.
Yeah, thank you. Here we have an interesting question from Sydney in Australia. That is Steve Wood, who has joined us from Sydney. And he says that Germany's policy with Russia seems to be totally contradictory. You know, they cooperate on the pipeline, on Nord Stream 2, but otherwise there's a lot of tension, cyber attacks in Germany, assassination attempts or successful assassinations on German streets and parks of Russian dissidents. How do you explain that? And also Steve wonders, what about the small players? You have talked about the big players like Germany or Russia and the United States, but what about Denmark, Finland, Sweden, or Poland and the Baltic states? How do they deal with that overwhelming weight of Russia's energy policy? Who can try to address these big questions of, about small states?
Let me say something about Lithuania and all the Baltics. All the Baltics have history and data about how they interact with the Russians, and it's a lousy history from their perspective, and they'd be very happy not to go back under their domination. So they have this history and this data, and therefore they align themselves with the EU and NATO. And so when NATO says, do you think energy is an issue? All the new NATO people say yes, and all the old NATO people say, it's not so bad. But the new NATO people say, we don't like that guy on the eastern flank. We need protection, because they have history on their side. So they are all expanding their sourcing. Right? They're expanding their portfolio, just like you should do with your financial portfolio. You have to do an electrical connection to Sweden and import French nuclear, et cetera, et cetera. So the small states are dealing, as small states always do, trying to diversify their sources. That's my view. I do want to say something quickly. We're giving Russia a great deal of credit here. If I were a strategic planner in Russia, I'd be scared stiff. Russia has a demographic problem to beat the band. They have longevity, drug, alcohol, AIDS, and COVID problems. They have climate problems. Russia is not going to be able to field a land army one generation from now. They're just losing their soldier age population. They are on the brink of not being a player.
It is a declining power, yes.
Declining power, hence a dangerous power.
Exactly. This is when many times we talk about how Russia is declining and how many problems they have. They could become very dangerous exactly at the time when they're facing the biggest internal problems, the social unrest, those demonstrations about pensioners who don't receive their pensions, and the all kinds of social protests and now COVID and whatnot. This could be the time of the most danger, because Putin has been always able to mobilize domestic support by starting some mischievous adventure or a war elsewhere. Ukraine, before that Chechnya, the second Chechnya war was a result of gathering the need to gather domestic support for the strong domestic leader that is leading the country. But how the small countries are dealing with this? Some are dealing with it, some are not. Some are succumbing to Russian influence and power. If we look at Hungary, if we look at Bulgaria, these two countries are completely falling into Russia's hands. They want to have strong leaders that are more authoritarian leaders. Those authoritarian leaders have close connections with Russia. The countries are fully dependent on many fronts on Russian energy, oil and gas and nuclear, whatnot. Russia is building nuclear power plant in Hungary. They built one in Bulgaria back in the 80s and supplying it with fuel and disposing of the waste. So the more dependent on Russia these countries are, the more the less they have chance to survive on their own. Other countries in the north, the Baltics and Poland, they have very different policy, and Romania as well. They have very, very different attitude, very different policies. And I will give you one example. Romania is boosting Black Sea security and leading the road to enhance Black Sea security for all in the Black Sea. Poland just announced that they're doubling their army because of the potential of Russian aggression.
Thank you.
Klaus, there was another element to the question, and that was the German reaction to the sorts of outrageous types of Russian behavior, such as the assassination of dissidents on German streets. Inevitably, at least during the chancellorship of Chancellor Merkel, there would be a very strong rhetorical response, saying that this was outrageous behavior, whether it's the assassination of a dissident or whether it's the cyber attack on the German parliament. There would be a very strong rhetorical response on the part of the German government. And the effect was, as far as I can tell, on the basis of all the public source information that I see, zero, insofar as any modification of Russian behavior was concerned. It strikes me as being useless to criticize unless the German government or the US government or some other government is willing to put some more muscle behind such an open criticism. Open criticism is not what moves, it seems to me, is not what moves the president of Russia. Being criticized, I don't think that matters.
Oh, that makes him even more popular at home.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
The thing with Germany is it's been valued very much in the United States for supporting the sanctions on Russia against Russia after the Crimea invasion and the invasion of Donbass, and playing really critical role in the European Union's decisions to continue with those sanctions. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we have this Normandy group that is negotiating on Ukraine, on the conflict in Ukraine that Russia started. Russia is part of the Normandy group together with France, Germany, and Ukraine. The agreement that they signed in 2015 was under duress and pretty much meant partitioning of Ukraine. And that agreement, Ukraine has not been able to revoke, to get Germany and to get France to revoke and start with another proposal. So Germany is in many ways complicit in not really doing everything possible to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and prevent another European security crisis.
So the questioner, by the way, asked, why is Germany acting this way and that way in seemingly contradictory ways? So the short answer is, from the California perspective, it's muy complicado, right? It's all very complicated. People don't, and countries don't act in consistent ways because their objectives change, their objectives are self-contradictory. The world is complicated. I know that's not a very nice answer, but foreign policy is like that.
Thank you. With these wise words, we go to the next question. Sam, please.
Yes, there's a couple of different questions concerning Ukraine that I'm going to combine. Ukraine does not appear to be a major pipeline customer. Why might that be? And what is the future of Ukraine now that Nord Stream 2 is almost completed? And the asker is asking both in terms of energy and security, what the future of Ukraine will be.
Thank you. Who asked these questions? Do you have names?
Yes, the first was asked by Dave Sidor, and the second was asked by an anonymous attendee.
Thank you.
Margarita, I think.
What is pipeline customer? Not appear to be a big pipeline customer. I don't seem to understand the question.
They don't use the gas. I mean, they were transiting the gas, but they didn't
Yes.
use it for their own.
There's a transit country. Ukraine does not buy directly gas from Gazprom. Ukraine buys gas from European customers of Gazprom. It's Russian gas that other countries are buying, and Ukraine is paying other European countries for that gas. So it's kind of, Ukraine is being supplied on the reverse, from west to east, from Europe to Ukraine. And the reason for that is the conflict, of course. They have some supplies of Russian gas to Ukraine according to a contract and decision of the court in a European arbitration court, but that's not a big volume. It's just medium, maybe 5 BCM or so. Problem for Ukraine is going to be when the two pipelines start working full capacity, and as I mentioned, Turk Stream already does, and Nord Stream 2 is not certified, then there won't be much transit through Ukraine. Gazprom wants to use the pipeline network just for emergency supplies, which makes it not economically viable for Ukraine to maintain a huge gas network for just emergency supplies whenever Gazprom needs them. And this is why Ukraine is thinking about development of green energy green hydrogen and refit those pipelines and those storages to keep green hydrogen and supply Europe. Apparently, they can supply about 1/6 of Europe's needs of green hydrogen. So Ukraine has a future in terms of several years from now being an important producer of green hydrogen, an important source for the European Union of green hydrogen, especially if the United States and Germany help, and there's many domestic problems in Ukraine to be solved. But in the short term, if these two pipelines are fully put into exploitation, Ukraine may not be able to buy gas on the rivers from the European Union. This is one of the consequences of preventing and restricting the regional gas market. Putin said a couple of years ago in Beijing that once Nord Stream 2 is built, there won't be any reverse purchases of gas for Ukraine. And that's the goal and that's the purpose. Ukraine needs to develop its own gas deposits. It does have gas deposits, apart from those that were stolen by Russia, because as you know, with the territorial waters of Crimea, a lot of the gas deposits went to Russia as well. So until Crimea is reverted back to Ukraine, they're not going to have access to those gas deposits. But they do have others that they need, and they are developing.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question, Leila.
Alrighty, this one serves as the perfect segue, and it's directed to all the panelists from Dmitry Mitten once again. Do you think that the recent pipeline construction in Russia is also incentivized by corruption? And he mentions that overpriced infrastructure projects seem to be a key mechanism for Putin's elite.
David, do you have any thoughts about that?
I couldn't quite hear the question. Had it to do with corruption?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. The pipeline policy in Russia, is it highly exposed to internal domestic Russian corruption?
I can only say that from the point of view of the German government. I would reiterate what Margarita said a moment ago. There is as much a possibility, it seems to be, of corruption on the German end of this pipeline as on the Russian. Chancellor Schröder himself, for example, is on the board of directors of Gazprom, a seat which he received as a direct return, it seems to me, for his being willing to sort of shepherd the Gazprom project along and initiate it in the first place. I think there's a huge possibility for this kind of corruption, to the extent that Gazprom is able to monopolize not only the gas itself, but the delivery also. So I look at it from the German end of this relationship rather than from the Russian end.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And the same thing would apply in Austria as well.
Yeah.
Yes, the former foreign minister became also a high-ranking official in Russian gas companies. So the corruption is endemic. Has penetrated everything, particularly big energy projects. There is the anecdote is saying a certain percentage is always put on top of everything that would cost for paying certain officials. How do you think Mr. Putin has made $40 billion in secret deposits in offshore banks? This doesn't happen through his salary, does it? So it's mostly the energy sector, because energy is such a big, playing such a big part in Russian economy, and energy, oil exports, for example, deliver 80% of Russian budget revenues, and it used to be even higher. Gas also has its place in budget revenues, in the revenues of the country. But the officials that are involved in these gas projects, they're taking a lot of money and they're paying a lot of money to their local counterparts to promote their interest. The fact that the interconnector between Bulgaria and Greece is not built for more than 20 years is a very good example. It has been a lot of sabotage by energy companies in Bulgaria, which are state-owned companies. Some of these people have been on the board and in executive positions in joint ventures with Gazprom. Nobody had interest among those people to build that pipeline that's going to diversify 1/3 of the country's consumption of gas, and it's not built yet. It's just the Bulgarians are in violation of contract with the Azeris for not buying the gas that they have contract for, and they're begging the Azeris to postpone and to delay because, see, we have a long-term contract with Russia, pay, take or pay close, and so on. But that's also reason. That's also because of corruption. So I think there was about 1/4 of every project that is designated for paying under the table. And you know what it means? It means that the quality of construction is not as good. And that means more methane emissions in the atmosphere. And this is the biggest danger to me. The pipelines that were built back in the day under the Soviets, they were at least more sturdy. They were at least more controlled. The quality of construction was more controlled. Now we don't have that anymore. So I'm really concerned about the new pipelines.
Thank you. I've got the ideal follow-up question, maybe first directed at Daniel, and that is Sunny Dodson asked, what about water? Isn't water the energy source of the future? China seems to concentrate on that. And what do the panel members think about the importance of getting energy from water in the future? And then Brian Keelev also asked, tell us more about how Wales, that very small nation within the UK, managed to obtain 70% of its energy from renewable sources. If they can do it, perhaps all of us can do it. Mm-hmm. Daniel, would you like to begin?
So the first thing, if I can remember this, we were just talking about corruption. A quick one. I don't know what level of corruption is going on in Russia. I have a general rule that the more autocratic, the more oligarchic, the more monopolistic a system is, the more it is prone to corruption because the rewards are so big. So I prefer open markets, but the more monopolistic and oligarchic, and Russia fits that bill, the more opportunity for corruption. And I assume that there's corruption there. On water. So if I were a strategic planner in Beijing, I've switched from being a strategic planner in Russia where I was scared stiff. Now I'm in Beijing and I'm scared stiff. They have a demographic problem that you can't believe, the one-child policy. They have ecological problems, and water is one of them. They used to get their water from the glaciers up north. They're gone. They have a desertification problem in China that is serious. They're so bad on water that they buy farms in the US to import the food because then they're using our water, right? The water came from our sources and then they export it to China. They have terrible problems. And so water is wrapped up in this nexus of energy and all that other stuff. But the truth is everything's wrapped up in everything and you got to draw your circle somewhere. And I've drawn it on energy. Yeah, water is important. It's really important, but I've stayed away from it just because I can't do everything.
And you don't produce energy from water?
You can actually, by hitting it with electricity, you break off the hydrogen, and then the hydrogen gets used in a fuel cell. I mean, that's really what's going on. I mean, we have, the problem is you have to put more energy in than you get out. Mm-hmm. Right? It takes a certain amount of energy to break the bonds in water, and then to have the hydrogen available. So we're interested in that in the US Navy, of course. We don't like to have to refuel, taking the ships offline. It'd be nice to just reach into the ocean and pull up some water and create hydrogen out of it. But it's energy negative ROI, unless.
Which means what? Which means what exactly?
A negative return on investment.
All right.
More than you get out of it. Sorry, I'm a cost benefit guy. So, but when it's not? When you have a nuclear plant behind you. Then you have an infinite supply of free, no marginal cost energy, and you can turn water into hydrogen all day long. So with a floating nuclear plant out there, you can create the hydrogen, leave it in a floating gas station and have people come by and pick it up. So you could get energy from water, but you got to be careful about how much it costs, how much energy it takes to get how much energy out.
Thank you.
And Klaus, I would add simply that in addition, the incoming German administration has made it very clear that hydrogen is a definite goal to which it wants to aspire. And the question then becomes, should it be so-called green hydrogen, hydrogen where the molecular separation is driven by electricity generated from renewable sources, or is it blue hydrogen, hydrogen which is created using electricity generated by natural gas? But they've also pledged themselves, these three parties, to making sure, or to mandating in effect, that all future infrastructure, pipeline infrastructure, be hydrogen ready. In other words, if it's going to be a new built infrastructure, it has to be ready to transport hydrogen immediately as soon as that hydrogen is available.
Thank you. Any thoughts on the Wales question and 70% of the renewable energy the Welsh were able to obtain or to produce? Does anyone have any idea how they managed to get that?
Determination and the need to move from one production, from coal, mostly coal production, to something else. I think Ireland and Wales, some of the places where we've seen a lot of innovation, and it comes from the need to make it. They're smaller. Ireland was extremely successful in the IT sector and many other sectors as well, and we see that in Wales as well. I mean, I think certain regions that depended exclusively on coal and coal mining, they had to change. It's an industry that not only pollutes the atmosphere but also kills people. It's such a dangerous profession to have. So it's policy. It's what the government wants to do and puts its mind to it, and it has a consistency from one government to another to continue with the same goal. I don't see that as a consistent policy in the United States very often. We did not have this concern about the climate in the previous administration. We have it now. If another administration comes from the other party in the country, we don't know whether these goals are going to continue. And people in Europe are concerned about the United States policy. It's consistency in good policy decisions and consistency in achieving them. This is the key.
Yeah. Thank you. I think we would all agree with that. We need consistency. We have only 10 minutes left, then we really need to finish our program today. But we have time for a few more questions. We have plenty of questions left. So Leila, I think it was your turn. Would you ask the next question?
Yes, James Luke wants to know, is US LNG a viable option for Germany?
There is a LNG terminal which is in the planning stage at the mouth of the Elbe River near Brunsbüttel. It is projected to go online in 2023. It's in the planning process now and has a planned capacity, I think, of 5 million tons per annum of processing and storage capacity. Whether that plant will actually be constructed is another matter. But it is in the planning process right now.
Thank you very much.
Sam, would you ask the next question?
Yes, we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Russia imports a significant amount of technology and machinery from NATO countries. Could intelligence systems be applied as a condition to monitor gas flow and control of the pipelines?
Margarita.
No, Dan should answer this. That's a good question for Dan.
Okay.
Yeah. If I understand, can we use the technology we sell to Russia as a monitoring mechanism?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure the monitoring is sufficient at the moment. I've always puzzled why the planners in Europe didn't see this shortage coming, right? Margarita can comment on that, but why didn't we see the shortage coming 6 months in advance and take steps to avoid it, maybe even hedge in the markets? But yeah, you can absolutely have ways for monitoring other people's things in direct and indirect ways. I don't think our knowledge is deficient. I think the political responses, as David said before, to bad behavior has been deficient.
Thank you. Leila, the next question, please.
Alrighty, this one comes from Jeremy Smith, and he prefaces it by saying U.S. has threatened to sanction Belarus over migrant crisis. Lukashenko has threatened to shut down Nord Stream 2 as it passes through Belarus. Will Putin allow this, and how will Germany and the EU respond?
These
It's
are interesting
Yamal.
questions.
It's a Yamal Europe, no, not Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 doesn't go through Belarus. It's Yamal Europe that goes from Russia through Belarus, through Poland, supplies gas to Poland and supplies gas to Germany. It's a very difficult situation right now with the migrant crisis that Belarus artificially created on Polish border, and with the threats that Lukashenko is sending to stop gas supplies through Yamal. I think Putin benefits from these statements of Lukashenko at the moment, because it makes Europe more nervous and puts more pressure on Europe to certify Nord Stream 2. But in the long run, I don't think that Putin is going to allow Lukashenko to do that. It is not going to be in his interest and in the interest of his energy policy to suddenly have gas shut down through Belarus.
My mind is even more conspiratorial. I think that Lukashenko says to Putin, look, I'm going to be the crazy man here. I'm going to suggest something crazy, and you will pull me back from the brink, and you'll look like a nice guy, Putin. And Putin says, that's a good plan.
And Chancellor Merkel made it a point yesterday of making a direct phone call to President Putin, asking him to intervene so as to keep not only the gas flowing, but to have Lukashenko ameliorate the conditions for these migrants and refugees on his own border. Whether her call had any effect, I don't know, but she certainly made the call.
Right.
I think Lukashenko has been thinking about this and probably sharing it with Putin for some time. Remember last week, it was end of October, beginning of November, when Yamal was not used for delivery of Russian gas at all. It was at zero for several days, and then Gazprom started using it on the reverse to deliver Nord Stream gas to Poland. Well, that meant no income for Lukashenko in Belarus, no transit fees. So I'm wondering whether that was any kind of a message, whether it was, saying that's what's going to happen once Nord Stream is in place. I may not need Belarus as a transit country.
Thank you.
No bordering state of Russia that does not have things stirred up by the Russians in accordance with box number 1, strategic depth. They want to make sure that their borderlands do not float westward.
But can you blame them? Richard Emerson asked the question, in considering history and the invasion by Nazi Germany, of course, Napoleon and so on. Can you blame the Russians for wanting to have strategic depths, if you say, or buffer states along their border from a Russian point of view, obviously? So can you really blame them for that sort of policy?
No.
No, we live in the 21st century. It's a very different century from point of view of security as well. If one state is behaving in such a way vis-a-vis its neighbors, attacking them, invading them, annexing territories, stirring conflicts that protracted conflict for a very long time. Look at Moldova, look at Georgia. This is not only Ukraine we're talking about. These are 5 different conflicts that exist in the former Soviet Union territory. And these conflicts are being maintained and being kept going because they give leverage to Russia. Well, that's not a behavior of a responsible power that is concerned about security of the entire region. Maintaining buffer zones, it's you can say NATO can do the same thing. Well, it's not really logical to do it this way. And I don't see any logic in that behavior other than an authoritarian dictator who is staying in power by mobilizing a domestic support around international issues and mostly presenting the neighbors as danger.
Thank you. Let me ask you a final question to all panelists to wrap it up for today. As someone mentioned tonight, that I think you, Margarita, was mentioned that Poland is doubling its the strength of its army. There are other dangerous situations along the Russian, European, EU border with various countries. But we clearly don't want military conflict with Russia. Shouldn't be engagement the solution? But it was said here, engagement, is impossible as well. So what is it? What shall we do? How can we deal with the Russia as it is, the Putin as it is, without going into military conflict, and of course, without embarking on a policy of appeasement? What can we do?
Winston Churchill said very famously that jaw jaw is better than war war, and one has to talk, right? One has to talk.
So Merkel ringing up Putin yesterday was the right way to go about it.
I think from her perspective, yes, absolutely, it was the right thing to do. The question then becomes, Klaus, whether or not the call has any effect.
Sure.
Making the call is in and of itself, it seems to me, a wise choice for Chancellor Merkel to do. The second part of that, however, is whether or not the call has any effect, and that remains to be seen.
Sure. Daniel, how do you see that?
You have to have the capability to use military means, but you don't want to use it. So to say it a little more nicely than many people would, the military forces are a peacekeeping mechanism, but without them, you will surely be run over. So it's a peacekeeping mechanism, and meanwhile, you can talk. The talking is good, but the other side has to know that you are not restricted to stern diplomatic notes.
Absolutely. If you don't want to fight a war, you have to prepare for a war. Otherwise, you're going to be run over. But Putin is a bully, and he's behaved as a bully with most of his counterparts. He tried to bully Chancellor Merkel, remember, with the dog? In her presence, she has fear of dogs, and he came with his big dog to that meeting after making her waiting for hours. That's on a personal level, but on a political level, he is behaving as a bully. He's bullying Ukraine. He is bullying other countries in the region. He is penetrating his companies and his operatives are penetrating other countries. These are all tools of subversion. And this is how we need to define it. It is subversion. Whatever Russia is doing in its neighborhood is to subvert those countries, either take them away from their prospect to joining European Union, or make them more dependent on Russian energy, promote Russian energy in order to make them more dependent, or use disinformation. I mean, just look at the COVID situation in Romania and Bulgaria. You think that there is not a lot of Russian disinformation there about the vaccines? Of course there is, and the sources are clear, and there's studies about that, and they can prove that with facts. But these are measures of subversion. So how do you deal with a dictator who is capable of having such behavior, bullying the neighbors, subverting the neighbors? He has to be put on his place, and he has to be shown that the European Union, the United States are united, and they can take care of each other and defend each other and deter Russian aggression successfully. But in order for that to happen, the first thing they need to do is resolve the conflict in Ukraine. This is one example that is going to show Putin that he is not successful in promoting and protracting long-term conflicts in the heart of Europe, because Ukraine is a European country. It's the biggest European country, in fact, in terms of territory. And we cannot just sit and wait to see what is going to happen. They gotta be much more decisive action to resolve the conflict there, and that's going to have an effect of putting Putin in his place and giving him to understand that the the international community is not going to sit idle and wait for his decisions to become.
Thank you very much. I think we need a special Krasno event on Ukraine, clearly. Dan, did you want to come in?
I just want to say that we did solve the Ukraine problem 15 or 20 years ago when the Western countries plus Russia said, okay, we're going to denuclearize them, and everybody agrees that nobody will touch their territorial integrity. We did settle it, and then Russia broke the agreement.
But it's not a mandatory, it's not a legal agreement. In the Russian version, it doesn't even say it's a treaty. It just doesn't have the legal power, which was just a goodwill agreement on denuclearization of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and so on.
As I said, we need a special event on Ukraine. We can't resolve it tonight. However, we have another Krasno event, the final one for this semester, coming up next week. And at that time, we will talk about NATO and Russia and how to counter hybrid warfare. And of course, many other related issues will fall into that. And that will be a hybrid event, which will be both in the Mandela Auditorium at UNC, and it will be an online Zoom event. But that is next week, November 18. For the time being, I would really like to thank all of our three panelists for having given us so many insights, having provoked so much discussion and engaged with each other in a very lively discussion. I think we have all learned a tremendous lot about it. And thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you very much to our audience for staying here until the very end, well over 2 hours. So I would like to thank Dr. Daniel Nussbaum, Dr. David Dorondo, and Margarita Assenova from the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C. And last not least, I would like to thank our two Krasno assistants, Leila Burka and Sam Timmons, for doing such a great job with the Q&A session. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, particularly to our three speakers for being so insightful, so interesting, so provocative, and also showing us a way forward, perhaps to a little extent. Thank you very much. Good night to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye-bye.